sister-in-law handed my 7-year-old daughter a mop for her birthday. Not a toy mop. Not one of those little pink plastic ones from the dollar section. A real one. The kind with a gray cotton head and a wooden handle taller than my kid. She had wrapped it in craft paper and tied a yellow bow on top, like that made it something other than what it was. My mother-in-law sat across the table watching my daughter unwrap it, and she smiled. That specific smile, the one that never quite reaches the eyes, that sits in the mouth like a decision that's already been made. "Every woman should know how to keep a clean home," she said. "Better to start young." My daughter looked at the mop. Then she looked at me. She was 7. She didn't have the language yet for what had just happened to her, but her face did. That particular collapse of a child who expected something and got something else entirely, something that told her what she was worth in this house. At the other end of the table, my nephew unwrapped a $400 remote-controlled car. Everyone clapped. I didn't say anything in the moment. I took the mop out of my daughter's hands, set it against the wall, and pulled her onto my lap. I sang happy birthday the way you do when your throat is tight and your jaw aches from holding something in. And I told myself I would deal with it later. I didn't know then that later would arrive 14 months after that birthday party, on a Thursday afternoon in March, when I would be sitting in the lobby of a law firm watching my mother-in-law try to sell a business I had built with my own hands, using my name without my knowledge. But let me back up, because you need to understand what this family is before you can understand what I did. I met my husband at 24. He was warm and funny and the kind of person who remembered the names of waitstaff and held doors open without thinking about it. His family was another story. His mother, Ruth Ann, was the kind of woman who controlled every room she entered through sheer force of performance. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She had a way of arranging things, people, situations, expectations, so that everything bent toward her without her ever appearing to push. His sister, Daphne, was the same. Quieter about it, but the same. I was a pastry chef, not the kind that works in a hotel kitchen punching out identical petit fours. I had spent 6 years building my own catering business from a rented commercial kitchen and a second-hand van. By the time I married into that family, I had a client list, a reputation, and a signature line of custom celebration cakes that had been featured in 2 regional magazines. I was proud of it. Genuinely proud. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how hard you worked for something. Ruth Ann never once asked about my work. Not the business, not the cakes, not a single event. What she asked about consistently and with great interest was whether I was planning to have another child, whether my daughter was enrolled in the right activities, and whether I had considered letting Daphne's husband, who had a background in sales, help me scale up. I had considered it. Once I said no. That was the first time I saw the real smile. For the first 3 years of my marriage, I wrote off most of what happened as personality differences. Ruth Ann was old-fashioned. Daphne was competitive in the way younger siblings sometimes are. My father-in-law, a quiet man named Gene, who had long since handed over the emotional labor of the family to his wife, was simply absent in the particular way that men in those families tend to be. He was there physically. He clapped at the right times. He said, "That's nice," when addressed directly, but he never intervened, not once. My husband tried in the early years. He would pull his mother aside. Have the conversation. Come back to me with something that was shaped like an apology but was really a request that I be more patient. I was patient. I was so patient I had calluses on the inside of my chest from all the things I swallowed. Then Ruth Ann called me crying. My husband's family ran a small events coordination business, nothing fancy. Corporate dinners, retirement parties, the occasional small wedding. It had been losing money for 2 years. Ruth Ann said if it folded, they would lose the building, which was collateral on a business loan. She cried in a way that I had never heard her cry before. A sound so raw and unguarded that for a moment I forgot who she was, and only heard a woman in genuine distress. I liquidated $38,000 from my personal savings, money I had put aside over 4 years of 16-hour days and skipped vacations and driving a van with a broken AC unit through 2 Louisiana summers. I transferred it to help keep their business afloat. 6 weeks later, Daphne showed up to Sunday dinner in a brand new SUV. When I asked, Ruthann told me that appearances mattered in the events industry, that clients needed to see a certain level of success before they trusted you with their events. She said it the way you say something that isn't a lie, but isn't the truth either. Something delivered with enough conviction to make you feel small for doubting it. I didn't ask again, but I didn't forget. What changed everything was a contract. 18 months before the March That Matters, Ruthann approached me about a collaboration. Her events business was being considered for a residency contract with a boutique hotel group that was expanding into New Orleans. The hotels wanted an in-house catering partner, the kind of arrangement that meant guaranteed revenue, a permanent kitchen space, and the kind of exposure that could change the entire trajectory of a small food business. The hotel group wanted to see a full catering concept. Menace, aesthetic direction, brand identity, sample packages. Ruthann said her business didn't have that. She asked if I would develop it. She did not ask me to partner. She asked me to consult. She offered a verbal agreement that I would be credited as the culinary director and receive a percentage of the contract if it was awarded. I developed everything. It took 4 months. I designed 3 seasonal menu systems, a full visual identity for what I called the gilded table concept, complete with a color palette, presentation guidelines, and a 40-page pitch deck. I built the pricing structure, the vendor relationships, the staffing model. I attended 2 preliminary meetings with the hotel group's regional director, introduced myself as the culinary lead, and answered every question about food and execution. Ruthann attended those meetings too. She smiled and let me talk and said, "we," the whole time, the way people do when they want credit for something without claiming it outright. Then she filed the contract under the name of her events business. Her name, not mine. I found out the way you find out things in families like that, not directly. Through the edge of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Standing in the kitchen at a family dinner while Daphne told someone on the phone that Mom's hotel deal finally came through. I didn't confront anyone that night. I went home. I put my daughter to bed. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water, and I felt the same cold that I imagine a person feels when they realize the house they're standing in is on fire, and has been for a long time, and they're the only one who didn't know. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about calling my husband. I thought about the $38,000. Instead, I opened my laptop and I looked at the contract filing date. Here is something they didn't know about me. 18 months ago, when I started building the gilded table concept, I had a feeling, not a premonition exactly, more like an awareness of pattern. I had watched this family for 4 years. I knew how they moved, how they took, how they covered their tracks with smiles and plausible deniability, and that's not what was agreed. So before I sent a single document, I did something quiet. Every photograph in the pitch deck, every menu layout, every branded image I embedded with invisible metadata. Timestamps, authorship markers, GPS coordinates from my kitchen where the work was created. It's standard practice in commercial food photography to protect intellectual property, I just applied it to everything. I also kept a private time-stamped folder in a cloud account only I could access, containing every draft, every revision, every email thread with vendors, every note I had ever made in the process of building that concept. I also kept the original contract to negotiation emails, the ones where Ruthann, in writing, referred to me as the creative lead and the culinary architect to the concept. I had never planned to use any of it. I had genuinely hoped I wouldn't need to. The hotel contract signing was scheduled for a Thursday. A formal luncheon at the hotel group's flagship property on Canal Street. Ruthann had sent a family group text that morning, something celebratory, all exclamation points and heart emojis. She did not text me. My husband showed me the message. He said he was sure I was invited. He said it was probably just an oversight. He had the look he always got in those moments, that particular expression of a man who loves his wife and loves his mother and has decided that the safest place to live is exactly between them. I didn't argue. I got dressed. I drove to Canal Street. The hotel lobby was the kind of beautiful that feels engineered. All pale marble and brass fixtures and arrangements of white flowers that cost more than most people's grocery budgets. I had been in that lobby twice before, both times as the person being introduced as the vision behind what they were buying. I walked in knowing the space. That mattered. The luncheon was in a private dining room off the main corridor. I could see through the glass panel in the door that it had already started. Ruth Ann was at the head of the table. Daphne was beside her. The hotel group's director, a woman named Miss Ford, who had shaken my hand twice and called my menu work genuinely exceptional, was seated across from them with a folder in front of her. A hotel staff member intercepted me before I reached the door. Polite. Professional. Very sorry, but this was a private event and my name wasn't on the guest list. I asked him to check again. He did. It wasn't there. I stepped back from the door and stood in the corridor for a moment. Through the glass I could see Ruth Ann talking, her hands moving in the particular way they moved when she was performing. She was describing something, gesturing toward a printed menu. My menu? The one I had spent 3 weeks refining, testing, costing out to the dollar. I thought about the mop. I thought about my daughter's face when she unwrapped it. I thought about the $38,000 and the broken AC in the van, and the 2 Louisiana summers and every Sunday dinner I had sat through with a locked jaw and a smile. Then I pulled out my phone and I called a woman named Petra, who was a food and hospitality attorney. I had been referred to 6 weeks earlier when I first started to understand what was happening. I had prepared for this possibility. I had not known the exact shape it would take, but I had prepared. Petra answered on the second ring. I told her where I was. I told her the signing was in progress. She said she would be there in 20 minutes and told me not to go anywhere. 20 minutes is a long time when you're standing in a hotel corridor. I spent some of it sitting on a bench near the elevator bank, watching the foot traffic, thinking about all the ways I could have prevented this and all the reasons I hadn't. There is a specific grief that comes with realizing that the people you tried to love never saw you the way you saw them. It doesn't feel like anger, not at first. It feels like embarrassment. Like you were the only one who didn't know the terms of the arrangement. Petra arrived with a colleague and a folder of her own. She had the quiet authority of someone who had done this before, not flustered, not hurried, just precise. She spoke to the hotel's on-site manager for 4 minutes. I watched her from the corridor. I watched the manager's expression change. Then the manager walked to the private dining room. He knocked. He entered. He spoke to Miss Ford directly, leaning down to say something I couldn't hear through the glass. Miss Ford looked up. She looked toward the corridor. She looked at me. Ruth Ann turned. For the first time in 4 years, she looked at me and I could see something behind the performance. Not guilt, exactly. Something more practical than guilt. Recalculation. They paused the signing. We were given a conference room. Me, Petra, Miss Forde, and her legal contact. Ruth Ann tried to follow us in. Miss Ford's colleague very politely closed the door. I presented everything, the time-stamped drafts. The metadata, the emails where Ruth Ann herself had described me as the creative lead, the vendor contracts I had personally signed, the 2 preliminary meeting records where I was introduced as the culinary director of the concept being pitched. Miss Forde went through the folder quietly. Her legal contact made notes. At one point, Miss Forde looked up and said, "You built this entirely." It wasn't a question. I said yes. The hotel group withdrew from the signing pending a review of the IP ownership. Ruth Ann's events business had 48 hours to provide documentation proving independent development of the concept. They had none because there was none. I stood up when the meeting ended. I shook Miss Sisson, Ford's, hand. She held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires and said, "I'd like to speak with you next week about what a direct partnership might look like." I said I would be available. In the corridor, Ruth Ann was waiting. Jean was with her. Daphne was on her phone, not looking up. My husband had arrived at some point, standing slightly apart from all of them with the expression of a man whose floor has just tilted. Ruth Ann looked at me the way she had looked at my daughter across that birthday table, as though I had done something inconvenient, as though I had misbehaved. She said, "You have no idea what you've just done to this family." I thought about that for 1 second, about what this family had cost me, about what it had cost my daughter, who learned at age 7 that some people in a family get drones and some people get mops. and that the difference has nothing to do with what they deserve. I said, I know exactly what I did. I walked to the elevator. My husband caught up with me before the doors closed. He put his hand out. I let him in. We didn't speak until we were in the car. He sat in the passenger seat and stared at the dashboard for a long time. Then he said, I didn't know. I looked at him. I had spent a lot of time deciding whether that was true, whether a person could live inside something for that long and genuinely not see it. I had decided finally that it didn't entirely matter. What mattered was what happened now. I said, I know you didn't, but you have to choose. He chose me. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't clean, and there were conversations that fall that were the hardest I've ever had with another person. But he chose me. 2 months later, I signed a direct catering partnership with the hotel group. The Gilded Table launched in the fall. My name on the contract. My name on the menu. My name on the door of the prep kitchen on the second floor of the Canal Street hotel, where the light comes in sideways in the late afternoon and makes everything look like it's worth exactly what it is. My daughter was with me the morning I signed. She sat in the lobby in her school uniform with a book in her lap, and when I came out of the conference room, she looked up and asked if it was done. I said yes. She went back to her book, 8 years old, unbothered, completely certain that things were going to be fine. She had no idea what that signature had cost or what I had carried to get to that room. She just knew I was her mother, and I said it was done. That was enough. That was the whole point. I still think about the mob sometimes, not with anger anymore. More like you think about a scar. You press on it occasionally, just to confirm it doesn't hurt the way it used to. What Ruth Ann handed my daughter that day wasn't just a cleaning tool wrapped in craft paper. It was a message, a small, deliberate instruction about who my child was supposed to be in relation to her cousin. And for a long time I absorbed those messages, the way you absorb bad weather. Head down, moving through it, telling yourself it would pass. It didn't pass. It accumulated. What I've come to understand is that the people who take from you rarely do it all at once. They do it incrementally, in small enough amounts that each individual moment feels survivable. The $38,000. The SUV. The meetings where I answered every question and Ruth Ann said we. The contract filed under her name. None of it announced itself as theft. It dressed itself in family, in loyalty, in the language of this is just how things work. But things work the way we allow them to. That's the part I had to sit with. I don't think Ruth Ann was a uniquely evil person. I think she was a person who had learned over a long time that she could take what she needed from the people around her without consequence. And I had spent 4 years confirming that lesson. Every time I stayed quiet at Sunday dinner, every time I accepted my husband's half apologies, every time I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good person, I was teaching her that I was available, that I was safe to take from. The thing that saved me wasn't anger. Anger came later, and honestly, it wasn't very useful. What saved me was clarity. The moment I sat at my kitchen table after hearing Daphne on that phone call and understood, really understood, what had been happening, something in me stopped negotiating with the situation. I stopped asking whether it was really as bad as it seemed. I stopped waiting for someone to acknowledge what they'd done. I just started building the case. That's what I want my daughter to understand someday. Not that the world is full of people who will try to take your work and diminish your worth, though some of it is. But that the most important thing you can do is stay clear-headed enough to see what's actually happening and principled enough not to become the thing you're fighting. I never lied. I never stole anything back. I used what was already mine. That distinction mattered to me then, and it matters to me now. There's also this: I had to be willing to let things break. The family dinners, the group texts, the version of my marriage that was built on my silence. Real courage, Irene, isn't the dramatic moment in the conference room. It's the months before it, when you're building something quietly and you don't know yet if it will hold, and you do it anyway because you've decided that you'd rather risk everything than keep paying for something that was never going to love you back. My daughter doesn't know the full story yet. She's 8, but she knows that I signed a contract with my name on it. She knows we drove home that evening and got pizza and she fell asleep in the car. That was enough. It was the whole point. It always was.